Hello everyone, my name is Lawan Allen, proud Rhode Island native and the executive director of Vote16USA. We're a national organization that supports youth-led campaigns to extend voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds in local, state, and federal elections. I'm extremely proud to be sharing space with all of you and want to give a thank you to all the partners and elected officials in the room, Secretary of State Greg Amore, Pawtucket Mayor Don Brebian, Rhode Island General Treasurer James Dioza, State Rep Cherie Cruz, State Rep David Morales, Cranston School Committee member Keith Catone, Providence Councilman John Gonzalez. I'm not missing anyone. Just want to make sure I get everyone. I'm extremely proud to again be sharing space with you all. We're gathered here today for a very, very important reason: to extend voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds in school board elections in Rhode Island. Young people, 16 and 17, for far too long, have been completely forgotten and disregarded in political spaces. Young people have something to contribute to the issues that they are disproportionately impacted by. Right here in Rhode Island, 16 and 17-year-olds are leading on issues around climate justice, criminal justice reform, common sense gun legislation, high quality education policy, and yet their innovative solutions to their community's most pressing needs are completely disregarded, eroding the trust that young people have in our democracy and democratic systems. We are gathered here today because young people have something to contribute to those conversations. We are gathered here today because our democracy, in order for it to be just, representative, and resilient, young people's voices must be included, heard, and valued. Across the country, 15 cities have already extended voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds. 10 cities in Maryland, 3 in California, 1 in Vermont, and 1 in New Jersey. And Rhode Island has the opportunity to lead, being the very first state in the country to extend voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds in every single school board election in the state. We have a pretty great lineup of speakers, and so I'm not going to speak for too long. But what I want to say is I appreciate everyone for being here today. And I'm going to call up our first speaker, and that's Secretary of State Greg Amore.
Good morning and happy holidays to everyone. I will not acknowledge all of the elected officials because Lawan did a great job of acknowledging them, but thank you for being here. To all my colleagues in government. I'm going to do a little history lesson since that's what I do. The legislation we're talking about, the Department of State has supported since it has been introduced. And we do so for a few reasons. We think that certainly opening up the opportunity for 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in school committee races brings them into the political process, brings them into the democratic process. And a Tufts University study confirms what we know, that if you are brought into the process early, you will stay part of that process for the rest of your life. And it's essential that we start to engage wholly as a society in the democratic process, that we begin to understand better how our government works. When you look at the percentages of Americans who are voting in presidential elections, in the last presidential election, only 65% of Americans cast a vote. And by the way, that's 65% of registered voters cast a vote. That is a danger for our democracy. When people are not engaged, when they do not understand how their government works, when they do not understand their rights, democracy is at peril. And the data proves that. So if you were to go back to 2012, the V-Dem Institute, which is based in Sweden, which is a nonpartisan look at democracy and the history of democracy. In 2012, there were 42 liberal democracies in the world. There were a little fewer than 200 nations in the world. 2012, 42 liberal democracies existed. I'm going to do a quick liberal democracy study for you here. Liberal democracies, where people get to cast their vote in a fair, free election. where if they lose, if their candidate or their party loses, they don't lose their rights along with that, because their rights are protected in a constitution. It's a system based on the Montesquieu and Madisonian idea that there should be a separation of powers, that there should be a system of checks and balances, that there should be an independent judiciary, that free speech is essential, that free press is essential. That's what makes a liberal democracy. In 2012, there were 42. Today, there are 29. That is democratic backsliding across the world, and that's dangerous. That is dangerous, because what fills that gap is authoritarianism, and that is even more dangerous. So when we offer young people the opportunity to start into the process in a school committee race, let's be clear about this. Our office backs this specific bill. We think that school committee members should hear from the people in schools. We think that committee members should speak to the people in schools. They should know about whether or not it's safe in those schools. They should know about the curriculum. They should know about the staff. And the best way to learn about that is to talk to the people in those schools, the students, the customers. In no other walk of American life do we not talk to the customers about their service. This would allow the customers to be part of that. And make no mistake, 16 and 17-year-olds are taxed. They pay gas tax, they pay sales tax, they pay food and beverage tax, they pay federal taxes. They're not represented in the way they should be with a school committee or school board vote. That's just a fact, and I hear the resistance to this. And let me make clear again, I am in favor of this specific bill to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in school committee races. Right? Those are essential to how a democracy works. But school committees do not have taxing power, despite the fact that these 16 and 17-year-olds are taxed. And that's an important distinction. That's an important distinction. But what we know is true, is the minute you engage a young person and they feel empowered to cast a vote about something they know well, they know how their school system operates, now you have empowered them for life. It is incredibly, incredibly important. Because if we do not do that, that backsliding that I talked about will continue. You know, those opposed to this will say that 16-year-olds don't have the capacity to make a decision in a school board race. I heard a 40-something-year-old congressman tell another member of Congress in a public hearing that due process only applies to American citizens. So this is someone in their 40s who has a disgusting misunderstanding of the Constitution of the United States, where it in essence says persons around due process in every section where due process is mentioned. So this idea that they don't know, why would you empower them with a vote? They don't know. The entire nation at every age level needs a civics lesson. But to give students the opportunity, young people, 16 and 17-year-olds, the opportunity to cast a vote around something they know well makes perfect common sense. And I would suggest to you that there have been many members of school boards and school committees who never attended a public school in their life, who never sent their children to a public school, but they are empowered to know what's best for their communities. This, to me, is a tremendous opportunity to create a gateway to democratic participation that we are in dire need of. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, SOS. Next up, we're going to have the Rhode Island General Treasurer, James Gills, to come up and speak.
Thank you very much, and I also share the same sentiment as our great Secretary of State about giving the opportunity to 16 and 17-year-olds to participate in their local school committee elections. And I think that's important because we know and value the power of voting. But more importantly, what's a better way of engaging folks at an early age and letting them understand that their voice matters through their vote. So that's important. And to elaborate a little bit about, 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds not knowing too much, my goodness, they all pretty much have cell phones, so they have access to the world. They can now purchase a vehicle online, they can access any information. Now with AI, anything is almost possible. And so these kids, this generation is even smarter than ever before. And so giving them the opportunity to get involved on issues that matter, like their curriculum, as the Secretary of State said, their budget, what's the future of the school, school construction, etc., is important because they are the students. We are there to shape their future, and what better than hearing their voices. So I'm in strong support of supporting this legislation, and I'm glad that you're all here with me today. But I think as we've seen year after year, we're always talking about engaging voters, and our Secretary of State is doing great, but why not start at an earlier age so that they can get in the booth, feel the power, and stay on. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, General Treasurer Diosa. Next up, we're actually going to hear from someone who I admire and have had the opportunity to share space with. They're an intern with Rhode Island Kids Count. I'm going to welcome up Marco Lima.
Good morning, everyone. Before I begin my remarks, I'd also like to thank Vote Juan's leadership and dedication to ensuring that youth have a seat at the table in the most authentic way possible, and a powerful way at that. This past summer, I had the honor of attending Vote 16's National Convention at the University of California, Los Angeles. And it was such a privilege to see young people, even younger than myself, speak about the amazing work their regional chapters have accomplished. And I want to emphasize that they have accomplished. So not that they're working on things that they've already put into effect. And I share this not only to give LaJuan his well-deserved flowers, but also because this moment reminded me why I've been advocating for the youth representative on the Rhode Island Council on elementary and secondary education to have full voting powers. For years, Rhode Island had a youth member sitting on the council specifically to represent student voice. Yet they have not been allowed to fully exercise that power. Their perspective is welcome, but their vote is not counted. My own journey in this work began during my senior year, just 3 years ago, when I worked alongside Paige and others at Rhode Island Kids Count to draft legislation that would give students more autonomy and real influence over their education. The bill is simple in language, but monumental in impact. It would grant the youth representative the ability to vote alongside the other members of the council, because representation without voting power isn't true representation, and our students deserve more than a symbolic seat at the table. However, it's important to note that this policy is nothing new. States like Massachusetts have embraced this practice for decades, and in Maryland, a former youth representative now serves as the adult chair of their council on elementary and secondary education. And I mean, that's powerful to hear, but even just talking to them, it was great to see how their engagement in this, when they were a youth, now led to what they do now in their professional capacity, but then on their capacity as a council member. And while the bill itself is incredibly important, it also sparks a broader conversation that we're having today. This legislation highlights the ways that our state has fallen behind in recognizing youth voice and meaningfully engaging youth in civic decision-making. It underscores why we must continue to embrace our young people and their desire to be civically engaged. What I didn't share earlier is that my journey to working with Rhode Island Kids Count and now with Vote 16 is not by accident. Both of these occurred because I had organizations and people like Young Voices and Paige to support me in my journey to find my own platform. Although I was trained in policy research through Kids Count, it was Young Voices who allowed me to gain a foundational and practical knowledge of policy and advocacy to ensure I was ready for these larger projects. Although my time as a youth now feels like it's coming to an end, it's people like everyone here today who allow not only my voice to be heard, but the voices of others. With that being said, I'd like to once again thank LaJuan and the staff members at Rhode Island Kids Count for allowing me to share my story with you all today. And let's work together to ensure that the young person on the Council of Elementary and Secondary Education finally gets the rights they deserve.
Thank you so much, Marco, and I want to give credit to you. You've been an advocate for youth voices, and your voice is very powerful, so thank you so much for being here. Next up, we're going to have State Rep Cherie Cruz representing Pawtucket.
Thank you, and thank you to all the speakers and that fabulous history lesson by our Secretary of State. I mean, it's why it's more important than ever, right? That young people have a meaningful voice in what directly impacts their lives, education. And that meaningful voice comes through voting power, right? Voting power that shapes what opportunities they can see in real time, opportunities that are meant to prepare them for their journey throughout adulthood. In Pawtucket, where I grew up, many 16 and 17-year-olds had already started full-time employment and started on that path of adulthood. I had already been emancipated, I lived on my own, and I was a parent while attending school. I had all responsibilities in all aspects of my life, except a meaningful say in my education. I lacked the ability to vote for who represented me in my education, to have a say in the policies and opportunities that would best support me as I continued on my journey into adulthood. The benefits, as we've heard so eloquently, of engaging young people in democratic process early far outweigh any counter-argument. Young adults having this democratic power is preventative, supportive in building their own futures. It's time to strengthen our democracy by ensuring those impacted the most by our education system have the meaningful voice in ensuring its effectiveness in their own lives. So we're at a crossroads in our democracy. Many are losing faith in our systems, our democracy, and question whether our voices matter anymore. Our democracy is going in the wrong direction, and we have a real chance here in Rhode Island to counter that narrative and start by giving young adults a meaningful voice in their education. So with that, I want to thank Vote 16, LaJuan Allen, and the rest of the Vote 16 team, and all here who are supporting this for bringing this a chance of hope to our democracy for young adults right here in our own state of Rhode Island. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Cruz. I appreciate you being here. Next up, we're going to have the Mayor of Pawtucket, Don Grepping, come up and speak as well.
So good morning, everybody, and those that know me, I have to start off with a joke. The reason that I am here is because LaJuan is a voter in Pawtucket, so I'll say that. And I want to point out that all good things come from Pawtucket. You have Rep. Cruz and Treasurer Dioso who live in Pawtucket, so I'll say that. But all seriously, LaJuan, thank you for asking me to be part of this. I can't imagine all the hard work that everybody, you and Vote 16USA have done, but it's important that we all stand here together as the elected officials. And I know I want to recognize also the labor leader, Pat Crowley, as well. We're all coming together for this very important issue. And it's really time that we expand the voting rights and the participation for the 16 and 17-year-olds on school board elections. Anybody that's concerned about it, this is at least the right place to start, and they should have that voice. You think about how Pawtucket and all communities, we're already engaging all these folks, all these organizations, from our schools. They're advocating for mental health, contributing to decisions in their schools, in the curriculum, and the pathways. That's so, so important. And we Pawtucket have a new superintendent with Randy Buck, who is leading the way, and he engages the youth in a whole different perspective, so that's so important. But at the end of the day, it really is important for them to do that. That's why I firmly stand here supporting the Vote 16 USA with the youth leaders of Rhode Island to allow them to be involved, engage in something that they know and should have the right to. It's about time that we recognize them as stakeholders. That's important, and as you mentioned earlier, getting them involved. But we should recognize them as stakeholders, decision makers, and partners in building a more responsive system for public education as well. So let's give them a say, let's trust them in their readiness, and together let's build Rhode Island where every student has both a seat at the table and a vote shaping their future. And I want to thank everybody for their support, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Also, I want to just, forgot to recognize the Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos is here as well, so I wanted to make sure that I recognize you. Thank you for being here. Next up, we have Rep. David Morales, who's going to also come up and speak.
Now, friends, while we can talk a big game in government about how important it is to engage young people, how important it is for young people to be aware as to what is happening around our world, as to what is happening in our city and our state, a lot of it is meaningless unless we take action. And for that reason, it is a pleasure to stand here in solidarity with our young people, but most importantly, fellow elected officials that believe that the best way to civically engage young people starts with granting them the right to participate in our local elections and to actually have the opportunity to vote. Because it's disappointing when one is having a conversation with an older neighbor who has expressed dissatisfaction and disillusionment with government. So much so that they have already stopped the practice of voting entirely. But now this is an opportunity where we can grasp the generation in front of us to start voting at an early age, and to do so each and every election, specifically right here at the local level. Within the city of Providence, there's actions that have been taken to strengthen our democracy. Because for the first time in decades, several members of our Providence School Board are now elected, as opposed to just simply being appointed. So when we have a school board composition where half of the members are elected, this is now the opportunity in front of us to ensure that it is Providence students that are having a direct voice as to who will be representing them, who will be advocating for them on the front lines when engaging with city council, when engaging with state legislators. Because we often hear from our youth about the critical need to have more mental health support in our schools. We hear from our youth about the importance of having greater representation within our classrooms, such as multilingual educators. But none of that will ever happen unless we have leadership that reflects those values and will use every tool in government to make our classrooms more diverse. That will use every tool in government to ensure that the educators on the front lines are those that are representing the needs of what our students need in this moment. And so it is a pleasure to be able to be a part of this broad coalition, because as we get ready for another legislative session, this has to be a priority to further strengthen our democracy, but most importantly, to strengthen the decisions that are made that impact all of our public schools. Because many of our students are actively paying attention. They're actively paying attention as to what happens on the national stage, but also locally. Whether they hear it from their parents, whether they see it on social media, whether they hear it from their teachers. It is almost inevitable that many of our young people are being exposed to the political process early on. So now is the time to take action. Because a few years ago, through the leadership of now Secretary Omori, we were able to pass a bill centered around civics. We passed legislation saying that every student within Rhode Island would have a civics project incorporated as a part of graduating. And we've seen the difference that it's made, because more young people are starting to make an effort to come out to the State House with their classes. More young people are actively a part of committee hearings, from the school board to the city council to the state legislative level. We're watching a growing presence of young people participating. But now is the time to formally extend the opportunity to vote. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to Vote16USA for continuously leading this effort. Because make no mistake, 2026 will be the year that our young people will be granted the right that they deserve to vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rep. Morales. That was really powerful. Next up, we have June Rose, who is a Vote16USA National Advisory Board member. She's going to come up and speak.
Good morning, everybody. Young people know what our city needs because they live its flaws, its successes, and its possibilities every day. In my role in government, I'm often inspired by young people. When they stand in the city council chamber demanding better funded schools or that we keep their families safe from ICE, their voices echo differently off those chamber walls. We get quieter. We listen. When I look around this room, I see so many leaders who I admire, people who fought hard for the seats they sit in. But the truth is, when politicians go door to door, their lists skip over people who can't vote. Lowering the voting age to 16 would make them stop. It would make them listen. It would make them earn those votes. In a city where paying rent feels impossible, young people about to enter the rental market deserve a say. In a state where the public transit so many rely on to get to school or to work is in crisis, young people deserve a say. In a country where student debt dampens our ability to dream beyond our next payment, young people deserve a say. And in a world where our planet burns, endless wars rage, and democracy falters, young people deserve a say. I'm sorry for being a downer, but man, who leads us through these challenges really, really matters. And the idea that 16 and 17-year-olds who are so affected by the decisions that we make don't have a say in who represents them, frankly pisses me off. Especially in school board races, where the debates aren't about some distant future. They're about their today, their classrooms, their safety, their mental health, their opportunities. The decisions we make in government deeply affect their lives. It's time we allow 16 and 17-year-olds to deeply affect those decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jude. Next up, we have Naomi Barrett, who's representing Parents Leading for Educational Equity. Thank you so much.
Hello, good morning. My name is Naomi Barrett, and I'm here on behalf of Parents Leading for Educational Equity. As parents, we show up every day because we know that decisions made in our schools shape our children's future. As a parent, an organizer, a community member, these things are very important. Education is important for the future of our children. But today we're here to talk about something that's just as important, giving young people a real voice in the decisions that directly impact them. School boards make decisions about curriculum, school, safety, mental health supports, funding, and so much more that help our kids grow. And the truth is our young people, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds feel these decisions immediately and personally. They're living the impact every day of these decisions. That's why we stand, When I was 14, I was already organizing in my community, supporting my household and working. I had to make big decisions and real decisions that affected my family's stability and my own future. And I know I'm not alone. Many young people today are doing the same. They navigate school, work, caregiving, mental health, and sometimes even many adult responsibilities long before they turn 18. That's why this conversation matters. Those decisions matter. That's why we stand with Vote16USA in support of legislation that would allow our young people in Rhode Island to register and vote in school board elections, giving them a voice in school governance. Isn't just a good policy. It's a recognition of the leadership and responsibility they already demonstrate. Young people are not the future, they are the present. They organize, they advocate, they care deeply about their schools and communities. Expanding the vote gives them power to influence the systems that shape their daily lives. As parents, we want our kids to grow into informed, engaged community members. My little one is 5 years old, but civic engagement is a part of our life every day, right? So we're starting even younger, right? So letting them participate now where the issues are meaningful and personal is one of the strongest investments we can make in our democracy. I'm proud to stand with families, students, and advocates in Rhode Island and who believe in expanding youth voice and youth power. Let's trust our young people. Let's give them the vote where it matters the most. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Next up, we have Providence City Council Member John Gonzalez.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a privilege to be here at the Rhode Island State House alongside such extraordinary leadership and a coalition of folks who really care about strengthening our democracy. And I just want to say, you're a former City of Providence employee, Don Grebian. I saw he just walked out of the room, but we're going to take some ownership over on here. And I just want to say, there are so many dedicated leaders with us today. Secretary Amori, you just heard from General Treasurer James Diosa, Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos, Mayor Grebian, Representative Cruz, Representative Morales, Chief Rose, the school committee members who are here today, Keith Catone, thank you, Kelsey from Rhode Island Kids Count, Plea, Young Voices, the Young Democrats of Rhode Island, and the Vote16USA National Advisory Board. Your leadership here truly means a difference, and expanding civic participation really matters. So I spent 10 years as a classroom teacher teaching 4th grade. And civics education is such an important thing that we need to be advancing in the city of Providence. As someone who was born and raised in the city, someone who attended Providence Public Schools, someone who had the opportunity to go to Brown for undergrad and grad school, but also someone who has the opportunity to attend Harvard. That's something that I don't take for granted, and I wish I had those opportunities early on. And when we think about what the Secretary stated, I have a great professor by the name of Pippa Norris who talks about this very issue, the democratic backsliding that we're experiencing in our country. And it's a serious, serious challenge where we've got authoritative leaders, the oligarchy continuing to expand its power, the checks and balances not working and functioning in the way that they should as a result of the democratic backsliding. This is precisely why we need to be expanding the right to vote. And when I think about leaders like Lieutenant Governor Matos and the work that she did on the city council years ago during my first term, where we were expanding the right to vote, particularly in our municipal elections, and expanding the opportunity for people to serve on our school boards during district and charter review and district recommissioning, that makes a difference. Everything makes a difference. And if there's one thing we know about strengthening our democracy, it's that we need every tool at our disposal to help our young people get involved and get excited about civics. And at this point, we should be trying everything, whether it's better curriculum, whether it's better outreach, maybe even speaking in numbers that the 16 and 17-year-olds or even the 4th graders that I once taught understand, 6, 7, even if that makes sense to them, then 16 and 17-year-olds having the right to vote surely makes a lot of sense. And it's the practical truth. Voting is a habit, and the research is pretty clear for places like Tacoma Park, Austria, Scotland, places that are on the cutting edge of allowing people to be involved in the right to vote, where we've got 17-year-olds consistently voting at higher rates than 18 to 20-year-olds. That's exactly what we should be doing. And as we heard, these students and these folks who are participating are involved. They care about transportation, they care about school funding, they care about job opportunities, they care about safety, they care about social justice, they care about climate change, they care about mental health resources. And if those decisions are affecting them every single day, they deserve a seat at the table. And that's not radical. It's responsible democracy. And when young people vote, it increases their engagement across families. It's the trickle up of how we should celebrate voter engagement. So I just want to thank Lawan for his leadership. I want to thank all of you for being here, for your leadership in expanding the right to vote. And so all of my colleagues here today, the time to act is now. I hope that General Assembly will expand the right to vote for our 16 and 17-year-olds in school board elections. And I just want to say, expanding that participation, strengthening our civic fabric, and showing Rhode Islanders that young people have the ability to show up and vote is what we all should believe in. So thank you so much for your leadership, and everyone, let's get this done.
so much, Counselor. Just a few more speakers here. Next up, we're going to have Peter Chung from Young Voices come up and speak.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much, Luan. To our elected officials, thank you so much. I'm just going to kick off by saying that young people can sniff out tokenism from a mile. And every time you want to bring them to the table, and every time you want them to give you their input and so forth, they will understand and they will see through you if you're not being genuine. And, so for that, I'm here today. I really want to, take this moment to, stand in this bold moment of strengthening our democracy. I'm a proud voice. I'm proud to voice my support for Vote16USA and their transformative campaign to lower the voting age to 16 and 17-year-olds. For many years, I've had the privilege of working closely with high school-aged youth, and I can tell you without hesitation that young people are not only ready for civic engagement, they're eager for it. They're motivated, informed, passionate, and deeply invested in the issues that shape their daily lives. Time and time again, I've watched them lead conversations, challenge inequitable systems, and push for change long before they're ever given a ballot. This campaign recognizes this reality. They're dedicated to expanding voting rights to individuals aged 16 and above, giving young people the voice they deserve in our democracy. Their vision is simple but powerful, a future where young people are not just subjects of political decisions, but active participants in shaping them. 16 and 17-year-olds are already fulfilling many of the responsibilities we associate with adulthood. They work after school and during their school breaks. They pay taxes, they drive, and in some states, they can even be tried as adults in the legal system. They form political opinions, contribute to civic discussions, and feel the direct impact of policies, decisions every single day. Yet, they're denied the most fundamental tool of representation, the right to vote. Young people are already shaping today and the future. They're organizing, they're advocating, leading, and demanding a better world. By expanding the vote to 16 and 17-year-olds, we're not just giving them something new, we're recognizing what they've already shown us, that they deserve a seat at the table. Many of the elected officials and folks in the room, every legislative season, you will see young people from across Providence, Central Falls, Pawtucket, here in our State House coming to be actively engaged. One thing that, I've learned in my time working with young people is that, we talk about programming, we talk about building youth leadership and skills. That is practice, right? But if we do not give them the ability to demonstrate that, and that's what the State House is, right? The People's House is, for them to be able to come and actively engage, that's a big disconnect. And as we've known that, the voting bloc, usually 18 to 24, many times over, people keep talking about that's the lowest voter turnout, that's the lowest voter turnout. So if we really, really want to be able to give, increase that voter turnout, if we really want to be able to increase that engagement, then we have to connect with young people early. And by giving them that right at 16 and 17, particularly to vote in, the education system, I think is really critical. I'll just end by saying that, we can build a more inclusive and representative democracy, one that honors the voices of all who are impacted by the decisions we make. Let's make this big step. Let's take the stand with our young people, and let's make sure their voices are finally heard where it matters most. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate you being here. Next up, we're going to have labor leader and also the president of the Young Dems of Rhode Island, Mary Walsh, speak.
Good morning. My name is Mary Murphy Walsh, and I'm the president of the Young Democrats of Rhode Island. Thank you, Luan, and to Vote16 for gathering us here today to speak about this extremely important voting rights issue. Today in our country, in our state, we're witnessing a crisis of democracy, as we've all been talking about. And far too often, we see and hear misplaced blame on the other. And many times that other is referring to an entire generation. How many times have you heard young people don't care these days? And I'm here to tell you, just as you've heard from every other one of my fellow speakers, that they care. They care about what books they're allowed to read, their rights to be their authentic selves, and about their own personal safety in their classrooms. But these decisions continue to be made without them, and in many cases against their own best interests. That's why Young Dems of Rhode Island has continued to advocate for legislation that's been sponsored by our champion Senator Mack and Representative Felix that would permit municipalities to enable 16 and 17-year-olds the right to vote on school committee members to ensure they have a say in who is entrusted to make these decisions on their behalf. We believe this is a fundamental right for our youth. And not just that, but a formative exercise that has lifelong implications for their participation in our sacred democratic process. It fosters the habit of dialogue, debate that must be part of the autonomy they already have been provided. We entrust them to, and many times depend on them, to operate vehicles for transportation, to work and contribute taxes, enlist in the military to serve our country, donate blood, and make their own medical decisions. They deserve to be entrusted with the right to have a voice. A body of empirical research shows that lowering the voting age to 16 improves voter turnout and civic engagement for life. In Tacoma Park, as has been discussed, Maryland, for example, 16 and 17-year-olds had a 69% turnout rate in the 2020 election, while the entire city had just an overall 54% turnout rate. Students in school today have been through arguably one of the most turbulent times in education, with the pandemic and further attacks from our federal government throwing obstacle after barrier to receiving a quality, equitable education. As students have returned to schools, a tiny but extremely vocal minority have been hurling attacks at every chance, turning classrooms into battlegrounds for vicious culture wars. This is manifesting itself in schools all over our state in the form of, I want to speak specifically about the issue of banning access and outing LGBTQ students in their schools to their parents and other anti-LGBTQ policies. These groups are self-identified as parents' rights groups, and they are part of a national extremist concerted strategy to take over school boards and have a supermajority of their own choices pushing their policies. And while these groups claim they're defending against indoctrination, their real aim is to manufacture a divisive environment of misinformation that can be used to stroke unjust fears across the country. By doing so, they hope to silence teachers' voices and replace school boards with ideologically driven members, thereby destroying the very fabric of public education from the inside. I want to share, before I wrap up, some disturbing statistics. 9 out of 10 LGBTQ youth have experienced harassment or discrimination within just the past year. 92% of LGBTQ youth stated that they hear negative messages about what it means to be queer, which impacts their mental health. And 40% of LGBTQ youth make a decision and feel like they need to end their lives, compared to just about 12% of the general population. Rhode Island students are at high risk to be part of these staggering statistics, and no one can argue that they don't understand or are not mature enough to have a say here. The right to vote and hold school committee members accountable is not an exercise in civics, it is a necessity. These students know what they need and they are fighting back. And they have organized and they have called experts and they're participating peacefully and engaging decision makers on what their needs are to no avail in many cases. And they need to be able to vote to hold decision makers accountable. They're clearly engaged and want nothing more than to be heard. This legislation legitimizes their voice. With stats like this, it is not an extreme to say that some of their lives depend on it. So I just want to leave you with, I believe our state's youth are thoughtful, engaged, smart, and caring, and they deserve to have the right to make sure their decision makers are too. And on behalf of Young Democrats of Rhode Island, thank you for having us here today, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Murphy. Next up, and thank you everyone for sticking with us. I know we have quite the lineup of speakers today, so appreciate the patience and you all sticking around. Next, we're gonna welcome up a good friend of mine and labor leader in the state, president of the Rhode Island ALF-CIO. Excuse me, Patrick. Try saying that 6 times fast. Patrick.
Thank you, Lamont. The alphabet soup of my movement is not a requirement of our support, but I am proud to say that we do support this legislation from the labor movement. And fundamentally, the reason why we do is because, I was joking about this with Secretary Moore, the preamble of the Constitution requires us to. It says right at the beginning, the first words of our founding document, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union. That's not a status, that is a requirement of all of us. And if we think about what that means in the Rhode Island context, we literally fought a rebellion, a war here in our state in 1841 and 1842 to enshrine the right to vote beyond just white male property owners. And our work is not done. Our work, it will never be done. It's what the Constitution requires us of. And extending the right to vote in school board elections for people starting at the age of 16. It rings very true to us in the labor movement because we know that unless you have a contract, unless you have your rights written down and guaranteed by a document, they can be taken away from you. And by passing a law to give 16, 17-year-olds the right to vote, it protects not just their voting rights, it protects all of their rights. All of them. Because if you don't have a say in the process, everything is just an empty promise. And when I think about how wise, intelligent the 16 and 17-year-olds that I know and love that are in my family or in my world, I trust them more than I trust a lot of the adults that I have to deal with. And I know they're making decisions not just for themselves, but for their peers, for their schools, for their communities, for all of us. And I have extreme faith and confidence that they will make the right decisions, even if I disagree with them. That's the deal. That's how we make a more perfect union in this country. So thank you, LeJuan and Vote 16 for all of your activism, and let's see if we can get this done this year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Last two speakers here, we're going to have Keith Catone come up. He's a member of the Cranston School Committee.
Thank you, LeJuan. Thanks to everyone for sticking around. Good morning. My name is Keith Catone, and professionally, I serve as the Executive Director of the Center for Youth and Community Leadership and Education, which is CYCLE at Roger Williams University. However, I'm also an elected school committee member representing Ward 1 in Cranston, Rhode Island. I'm here today in my capacity as that elected individual, and while I do not speak on behalf of the entire committee, I do believe that many of my colleagues share my sentiments in support of extending voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds for local school committee elections here in Rhode Island. Through my job at CYCLE, I have worked closely with youth leaders from across New England, including many here in the state of Rhode Island, Marco back in the day, as they are the only ones, literally the only ones, living the day-to-day experiences of being students. Young people have unique perspectives and important ideas when it comes to improving our schools. And they clearly have a lot at stake. By affording young people who are at least 16 the right to vote for school committee, elected members will be held accountable to the constituency that matters most in our schools, the students. And as an elected school committee member, I would welcome this level of accountability. Students are the most talked about, but often the least consulted constituency in our public schools. And as we have taken positive steps to improve civic education in our state, it's a logical next step to expand our democratic practices so that we do not just talk about how to improve schools for young people without providing them a more meaningful voice. Supporting 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in school committee elections will not only help hold elected officials like me, most directly responsible for public education, accountable to the needs of students, it will also, as has been said, strengthen our democratic systems in Rhode Island. At a time when politics and elections might be alienating for many due to the division and vitriol we too often see playing out nationally, we can send a message to young people here in Rhode Island that we are invested in them, we are invested in our democracy, and invested in our collective future that will require their leadership and their wisdom.
Thank you so much, Keith, for providing remarks. Our last speaker, and certainly not the least, is Lieutenant Governor Sabina Matos. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all of you to stick around. We heard from a really big coalition of leaders in our state that support this initiative to have the 16 and 17-year-old vote. And I promise you I'm not going to repeat everything that we heard, because they really make the good case. But one thing that I really want you to think about is the perspective that our school district, especially those in the inner community, the inner city, has a lot of members that have families that have immigrated to the country or to the city, to the states, that their parents are not able to vote. The students, many of them that were born here in the United States, do have the opportunity to vote. And if we can get those students to vote, at least to make the decision for the school board about who's gonna be dictating the future of the school or the school system, it's gonna have a big impact, because they're gonna be the voices of those households that had not had a voice in the decision making about electing the leadership of the school. Right now, we have to allow the students to vote at 16 and 17. And just like we heard before, every time I go and I speak to a group of students, I get invited a lot to speak at our schools. It's one of the things that I enjoy the most, going to speak to our young people. And the question that they ask me are more insightful and better researched than the question that many adults ask me. They have the maturity to make the right decision for their own education or for their own future. And right now, at a time in which a lot of people are losing hope and faith in our democratic system, now more than ever, we need a new infusion of hope and leadership that comes from our young people. So I'm here to pledge my support and demonstrate my support for this initiative. Thank you.
That wraps up our program. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor, for providing remarks. That wraps up our program. Thank you all for being here. As the Lieutenant said, this was a wide coalition, and we look forward to the General Assembly moving this bill forward, passing this bill, and allowing 16 and 17-year-olds the opportunity to vote in school board elections across the great state of Rhode Island. So thank you very much. Thank you so much for being here today.